The date was August 12th, 2024. At last, the search was over. I had collected all the supplies I needed to build a one-of-a-kind paludarium for a trio of intertidal isopods. But time was of the essence. Just 1 week from now would mark the beginning of the end. My final hours. But before I get into the meat of it, I should probably explain my reasoning behind doing this. So this is a sea slater. This one's actually carrying eggs, and I'm pretty sure it's Ligia exotica, but inside of the Ligia genus, it's very difficult to differentiate species from species, so I'll just go with that. Most people would say these look like your everyday non-conglobating isopod, and there's a lot of merit to that argument. But upon a closer inspection, there's actually a lot of differences, both physically and behaviorally. So after dedicating a day to learn everything I could about them, I put together my saltwater and isopod keeping experience to build a unique, never-before-built paludarium, and I think it's pretty awesome. So now with explanations out of the way, let's get to building it. Alright, so what my plan here is to use this cereal container and stuff it with sponges. A sponge, and then stick the sponge in there. The plastic wrapped sponge into the container. Alright, so I think I found a solution. If I shave off a chunk of another sponge and then wedge it in with the other sponges, then it does make a seal to an extent. That should work. So now I'm here, I have a waterproof retaining wall, so I can put the pump here and the tubing going into here. That would just make like an infinite loop. It would just turn this into the filter and aquarium. It'd be like a built-in filter. So this needs to go out of here and into the aquarium somewhere else, which means that the other tube from the aquarium is gonna have to come in here to that. Alright, I put some rocks here because the sponge was falling to the right, and this is where you would put filter media if you have access to any. I already used all of mine. You also probably recognize the setup on the left from the previous video if you watched that, and I'm gonna use that to test the water. So after building and verifying that the filter actually works, we can move on to building the paludarium itself. Nothing could possibly go wrong that would make this all obsolete for a much more simple solution, right? After all, I am the master of measuring once and cutting twice. Hold on a minute. Alright, I found a much much more simple solution. Instead of doing the whole barrier thing, I could just stuff a sponge down at the bottom of it. This way, the water is forced to flow from down here up through the sponge and then into the second pump. Now all I have to test is if it can pump salt water, and then we can build the paludarium for real. Okay, for the substrate layer, I used a little bit of live sand from a pre-existing aquarium, which means it already comes with nitrifying bacteria that can kickstart the cycle in the paludarium. But for the most part, I used play sand because it looks the most like the sand where I found them in the wild. Here my logic is to use black rocks so they can feel like they're in a dark crevice, even if they're just a few inches below the surface. Followed by a layer of tan rocks, solely because I think they look nice. Hey, this seems familiar. There aren't many options for plants in saltwater, but this was one of the most available options. And using my master photography skills, I managed to record these whole 2 square inches of the tank. This is where the sea slaters were before, and where they're gonna be after. How dramatic that difference is, I'll let you decide. I actually did end up finding a spot for the chunk of sponge that wasn't used from the previous iteration of the filter. Now it serves as a barrier to stop baby sea slaters from getting themselves eviscerated. To catch, transport, and not squish the babies from the previous container was not an easy task. It actually ended up taking me close to 20 minutes, but luckily I time-lapsed it. Speaking of time-lapses, here are a few I recorded shortly after I finished building it. Thank you so much for watching this far into the video. I put a lot of work into this one, and I think it's one of my favorites. And for anyone who wanted to watch the full lengths of the time-lapse near the end of the video, I'll be sure to link them in the description.